Hi, and welcome to episode 6 of Full Moon Film Buff. This week we're going to be talking about Cat People from 1942. I rented this from Amazon Prime, and this was my first time seeing it. Now let's talk about the prominent crew and cast. This film was directed by Jacques Tourneur, called Jack Turner while he was in America. It was written by DeWitt Bodine. The cast includes Simone Simon, playing Irina Dubrovna Reed. Kent Smith played Oliver Reed. Tom Conway played Dr. Lewis Judd, and Jane Randolph plays Alice Moore. An interesting tidbit, Mark Robson, the editor, claims this movie invented the jump scare, though he calls it the Luton bus, after the film's producer, who apparently used it quite a bit in his future films. A jump scare is where quiet tension is allowed to build through setting, editing, soundtrack, and cinematography before a loud noise, cut, or fast movement startles the viewer. In Cat People, it's the loud arrival of a bus that interrupts the tension. Simone Simon is not Serbian, but is in fact French. So, I don't really recommend this movie. It's slow. There are some pretty tense scenes, but those scenes end anticlimactically, although on future reflection, and we'll talk about this later, I think that was probably intentional. I didn't really find this fun, scary, or that entertaining. That said, it is our first female shapeshifter. Well, our first female shapeshifter that we can actually watch. Obviously, there was the very first one, but this is the first one that we can see. It's our first non-wolf shapeshifter. And those two things do make it interesting on some historical levels. So while I don't really recommend it, I also don't say it's awful and you shouldn't watch it and it's bad. If you're interested, by all means, check it out. I know some people like it. It just wasn't really my cup of tea. Now for the spoilers and the synopsis. Serbian fashion artist Irina Dubrovna meets American engineer Oliver Reed while sketching a panther at the local zoo. Irina is a lonely woman with no friends. She has a fascination with panthers, but animals don't like her. Oliver brings her a kitten as a gift on their second date, and the cat hisses at Irina. This is contrasted by Oliver's co-worker Alice Moore, whom the kitten loves. They return to the pet store to exchange the kitten for a bird. While in the pet store, Irina's presence sets all the animals off. Several weeks later, Irina stares, fascinated at the bird. The bird dies of fright when Irina grasps at it in its cage. Irina is nervous about kissing Oliver. He says he will give her as much time as she needs to overcome her anxiety. Months later, Oliver and Irina marry. At a celebration after their wedding at the Belgrade, a Serbian restaurant, a cat-like woman walks over and addresses Irina as Moja sestra, my sister. Irina is haunted by a story from her homeland, telling how the people of her village used to be witches and devil worshippers. Under negative emotions like jealousy or anger, they could change into panthers. She calls them cat people. Oliver interprets this as a folk tale, but Irina believes it to be true. So real, she refuses to sleep with or even kiss her new husband because she believes she will hurt or kill him. Oliver suggests Irina see a psychiatrist. She has a hypnotic session with Dr. Lewis Judd, who was recommended to Oliver by Alice. When Irina returns home, she finds Oliver and Alice discussing her. Irina gets angry when Oliver reveals he told Alice about her problem, and Alice has been offering advice. A week later, Oliver learns Irina has stopped seeing Dr. Judd. Concerned about Irina's belief in these folk tales, Oliver again confides in Alice. Alice confesses that she loves Oliver, and Oliver admits he isn't sure he really loves Irina anymore. When Oliver gets home from work, he and Irina quarrel about her not keeping her appointments with Dr. Judd. Oliver goes back to the office, stopping first at the snack shop around the corner. Irina calls up the office, but when Alice answers the phone, Irina hangs up. Alice learns Oliver is at the snack shop and decides to join him. Irina walks down to the office, passing by the snack shop along the way, and sees Oliver and Alice in there, together. When they leave the shop, Irina follows Alice, scaring her badly. This is where the bus scene occurs. One afternoon, Oliver, Irina, and Alice visit a museum. Oliver and Alice are interested in seeing the scale models of boats.
and suggest Irina look at displays on the next floor rather than being bored by the boats. Irina is visibly bothered by the pair excluding her. The three plan to meet in an hour, but Irina does not show up. After leaving the museum, Alice goes to the gymnasium for a late swim. Irina follows her again. The place is empty, save for a desk clerk and a cleaning lady. As Alice gets into her swimsuit, she hears what sounds like a growl. Scared, Alice dives into the deep end of the pool and treads water in place. The growling gets louder. It's in the pool room with her. Alice starts to scream. Suddenly, the light goes on, revealing a pretty smug Irina. Irina asks if Alice knows where Oliver is, and then leaves. When Alice gets out of the water, she finds that her robe has been torn to ribbons. Alice goes to see Dr. Judd. She tells him about being followed twice by something inhuman, which she believes may be Irina's cat form. Judd says it is just her imagination. Irina consults Dr. Judd as well. She confesses about the incidents with Alice. He tells her she is on the border of insanity and he could have her put away. He advises her to forget all this cat people stuff and lead a normal life. When Oliver comes home that evening, Irina is setting the table for a romantic dinner. She tells him she is no longer afraid. Oliver says it's too late. I love Alice, he admits. Irina tells him to leave. The next afternoon, Oliver and Alice have lunch with Dr. Judd to discuss how to proceed with Irina. Dr. Judd says it would be best for Irina to be institutionalized so that she can get the help she needs with her insanity. However, he recommends an annulment so Oliver and Alice can marry without encumbrance. Oliver and Alice opt to have Irina committed to a mental hospital where she can get the help she needs, even if this means they cannot marry as quickly as they would want. The trio arrange for an intervention with Irina at 6 p.m. at her apartment. By 7:30 p.m., Irina still has not shown up, so they leave. Oliver and Alice intend to return to the office. Dr. Judd leaves with them, but then returns to the apartment so he can retrieve his cane, which he intentionally forgot. He also leaves the door unlocked. Oliver and Alice are working when the telephone rings. Alice answers, but the caller hangs up. Alice is scared and wants to leave. They turn out the lights and go to the door, but it is locked. Then they hear a growl and see a panther in the room with them. Oliver grabs a cross and tries talking to Irina, pleading with her to leave them alone. Oliver and Alice manage to get out of the building. Dr. Judd has returned to Irina's apartment. When she enters, he kisses her. Irina turns into a panther and kills him, but he stabs her with his sword cane before he dies. Irina goes to the zoo and frees the panther with a stolen key. The panther knocks her over and kills her before getting hit by a car itself. Oliver and Alice find Irina dead outside the panther's cage.
So, Irina is clearly meant to have transformed into a panther, but we never see that. It's only suggested through shadow and sound. That could be because of budgetary reasons. That could be because the director worried that applying makeup and showing a transformation would make Irina less attractive and less sympathetic, which says some interesting things perhaps about the way we treat different genders as it regards to attractiveness. Irina's transformations are completely controlled by her emotional state. When she feels strong, negative emotions or strong passionate emotions like anger or jealousy or even arousal, that's when she changes. She has to keep herself on a very tight control in order to avoid transforming. It's also never really explained what transforms her back into a human. We don't see that. It's never explained, and Irina never tells us a story that explains whether that's under Irina's conscious control or not. While she is a werepanther, she does seem to have supernatural powers of stealth, but not speed or strength. We don't see anything that reflects that she's strong. We also don't get any discussion about what potential weaknesses she has. Ultimately, she's stabbed with a sword, is what eventually does her in. So the primary theme that this movie deals with is fear of intimacy. Irina is very sex negative, for lack of a better way to say that. She's afraid. She's scared. Now, Minus the supernatural elements, Irina could have any number of really good reasons for feeling that way. But we never hear about any of that, and the movie doesn't seem to be arguing that that's what's going on in this case. Irina is afraid of her own passions. She's afraid of what she's going to do while she's under the control of her passions, which is a weird thing to think about. She's still herself, but she is afraid of her desires. She's afraid of how she's going to act and what she's going to do based on her desires. Ironically, her fear ends up being a self-fulfilling prophecy. Without the supernatural elements of the werepanther, she still ends up driving Oliver away before she turns into a werewolf, out of her anxiety and as a consequence of her behavior. The movie also does hit somewhat on the themes of infidelity. Oliver and Alice never cheat on Irina. The movie's very clear on that. Even after Oliver and Alice have decided to get together, they postpone their future wedded happiness so that they can do the right thing and take care of Irina in what they perceive as her mental instability, make sure that she gets the care that she's needed for. However, Oliver and Alice do have an emotional relationship that can rightly be perceived as threatening by Irina. Alice is talking about Irina and the difficulties in their relationship, including their sexual relationship with another woman who at one point confesses that she is in love with Oliver. That's a really dangerous place and a threatening place to put Irina in. I completely understand why she's worried and nervous about what Oliver might do. Now, I don't think Irina has the greatest responses to that. In fact, she doesn't. She acts in self-destructive and ways that are destructive to the relationship, but she's not acting completely out of an irrational fear. There is something going on. It maybe just doesn't need, to turn into a panther to deal with it. Next, I wanted to talk about how this film deals with the immigrant experience. Irina is alone in a strange city. She doesn't have any family. She doesn't have any friends from back home, anyone to understand or believe her story. Now, she's surrounded by people who do seem to care about her. Oliver genuinely seems to love her in the beginning of the movie and care about her and want her to be happy, but he can't really understand where she's coming from. She's trying to fit in this new and different place, and it's a challenge. And that challenge ends poorly here. To be fair, her story about turning into a werepanther is a difficult story to believe. I don't really blame Oliver for believing this to be a myth or a fairy tale, but it's true, and the way he responds is often not great. This focus on the immigrant experience also brings up something we've talked about before, which is the other. In this case, it's Eastern Europe, Serbia, that's standing in. We've got this story about these wicked Serbians who in the Middle Ages worshiped the devil and learned to turn into cats to pursue their wicked ways. That's not something that Chicago boy learns to do. Now, the film doesn't really seem to treat her poorly. She's presented as like anybody else, just from a different place. It's just that we have an easier time accepting that somebody from Serbia can turn into a cat person than we can, let's say, somebody from Charlottesville. The final theme I wanted to talk about is an interesting one for this movie because we are dealing with a person who turns into a cat, right, a big panther. And that is playing with your prey. A few scenes in particular that deal with this. First, there's the scene where Irina feels compelled to snatch and grab at the bird trapped in the cage, eventually leading it to its death from fright. Why? Because she has the spirit of a predator in her, a cat who wants to toy with its prey. The next two scenes are both times when she threatens Alice. First, trailing her in the dark as Alice walks along the street, and then trapping her in the swimming pool. In both cases, Irina seems to take great pleasure in torturing Alice and letting Alice know that someone dangerous is following her, that she really is in danger and that something bad could happen, even if she then lets her off the hook at the end. Again, in a manner like a cat, got a mouse batting it around, dangling the possibility of freedom in front of its face, only to finally break its back or bite its throat.
One thing I wanted to talk about, but I realized that I had missed, is Dr. Judd and what an awful psychiatrist he is. Let's run down exactly what his relationship with Irina is. The very first time she comes into his office, he immediately takes her into a deep hypnotic state to try and uncover past repressed traumas. No conversations, no discussing what's going on with her, no looking at her feelings towards sexual intimacy, her relationship with men, anything. Straight into hypnosis. After one session, he's prepared to tell her that she's got some kind of psychosis going on and that she needs his continued help. Later, he pursues a sexual relationship with her, which is highly unethical. Please do not see psychiatrists like Dr. Judd. Please.
In conclusion, again, I think this is a really interesting movie. I just didn't find it a very entertaining movie. This movie did get remade in the 80s, and so eventually we'll come back to it and revisit it again. But I think it was a worthwhile experience. I'm glad I finally watched it. Next week, we're going to talk about another film also made in 1942, this one called The Mad Monster. So, if you like lycanthropes, like and subscribe. Keep an eye on the moon and a silver bullet in the chamber, and we'll see you next episode.